There's something I need to get off of my chest. A decade-old memory. One that's always scratching at the back of my mind, like the twisted branches of a dead tree. It's a tale so harrowing that I've never told anyone about it. This story is set in a distant, desolate place called the Weeping Woods. You'll first need to understand why I was in that unspeakable place, so far from proper civilization, with 3 of my friends. We were social science students, all 4 of us, obsessed with culture, history, myth, religion, the works. We were looking to take on an honors research project, and naturally, we wanted it to be something big, something original. It was Jack, my closest friend, who suggested it. He was from Pennsylvania originally, specifically a town some 50 miles from the forest. He told us about the Weeping Woods. He told us about the Woodwick Walker. Of the 4 of us, Tina was the folklore junkie, so naturally she snapped at the suggestion. Come on guys, she insisted. We'd get to do a road trip, camping, and our project all in one. And I'd bet good money that none of the other groups are going to research anything as creepy, or as intriguing as what Jack just told us about. I couldn't argue with that, and I had no better suggestion. Marcus, our other friend, wasn't as eager. Spooky stuff really wasn't his thing, but he saw the rest of us agreeing and sighed. All right, fine. So we packed Jack's truck with everything we'd need to drive out of state for up to 2 weeks. Luckily for us, his Silverado was built like a goddamn dump truck. It could fit the 4 of us, all our clothes, food, additional supplies, and most importantly, our recording equipment. Jack and I took turns driving, so the trek all the way up to Pennsylvania went by quick enough. We only stopped if we needed gas or the bathroom. Along the way, Jack told us more about the legend. The Weeping Woods are named as they are supposedly because those who escaped them were always in tears. According to who? I asked. Jack shrugged. That's just the legend. As unlikely as it sounds, the tale took hold enough that no one from my town liked to go there. He nudged his head at the rear-view mirror. The reason we brought the saws and towing cables are in case the road is stopped up. The dingy old track that leads to the woods is used so little that it often ends up blocked by fallen trees. Marcus's breath hissed through his teeth. We had to choose the scariest, most backwater place in the world, didn't we? Hell yes, Tina replied. You're damn right we did. So, I asked, why were people crying? I guess it had to do with the Woodwick Walker. Sort of, Jack said. They were crying because they'd been forced to leave people behind. When asked about what had happened, they'd always have a hard time talking about it. A few gave vague descriptions of a man in the woods who was part of the forest. Oh, Tina sighed. I love this shit. Please, go on. Jack nodded. The one bit of info that solidified over the decades as the rule of the woods is this. Do not look at his face. If, when you encounter him, do not look. His voice grew stiff as he explained. Close your eyes. If you can't do that, then stare at your feet. Nothing else. Jack, Marcus murmured. You got awfully serious just now. Jack cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the road. Did I? You definitely did, I agreed. Sorry, I still bug out over it a little, even all these years later. Have you been to the Weeping Woods? I asked him. I've only been to their edge. To tell you the truth, this legend scared the living shit out of me as a kid. The area around the house I grew up in was forested too, and I'd always imagined seeing him between the trees. I lifted an eyebrow. If you're damn well traumatized by this thing, why'd you suggest it for the project? The only way to overcome a fear is to face it, he said. True enough, Tina agreed. I have to admit, the way Jack talked about it during that ride got to me. Even Tina was a little more reverent about it all after that. And Marcus was so spooked, we were worried he'd jump ship and hitchhike back south. But the 4 of us pressed on. The road meandered, rose, and fell until eventually the rainy autumnal woodland of Pennsylvania appeared on the horizon. It was late autumn, so the pretty colors had given way for the most part to barren trees, with only a smattering of rusty brown leaves left on them. We drove through Jack's town, which in itself was so backwards that it was hard to imagine any place more far-flung. There was one diner in the whole of the place, a local spot offering breakfast on the overcast morning we'd arrived. We knew we'd be living off our camp food for the next while, so we popped in there. When we told the friendly waitress what we were up to, she stopped being nearly as nice. "You kids promised me one thing," she said in low tones. "You keep your eyes to the ground in them woods." We laughed a little at that. She didn't. I finished my food quickly, eager to get out of there. As we walked back to the truck, Jack said, "See? It's a whole thing out here." "And you thought this was a good idea?" Marcus groaned. "Relax, guys," Jack went on. "It's just a legend. A story." Tina said, "We should stop by here again when we're done camping." A recorded interview with that waitress, or any other locals who might have something to say, would be great for the project. "Hell," I said, "we ought to record an interview with Jack. He's got plenty to say too." Yeah, Jack sighed as he thumped his door shut. "Get in, we're losing daylight." "Just how far do we have to go?" I asked. 20, maybe 30 miles, Jack explained. "No one actually knows how far the Weeping Woods are. The road there is kinda." "Kinda what?" Marcus prodded. "It's kinda weird, you'll see." He wasn't kidding. Even the turn onto the road was decrepit. The pavement of the highway gave way to mulchy dirt, so littered with branches and fallen leaves that only Jack's trained eye could have spotted it. The road itself was derelict, a vestige of some bygone era. The way it veered and twisted was illogical. Oftentimes we felt like we were turned all the way around and going back towards the highway. And the whole way the only real indication that we were still on the road was the tall gnarled trees lining the track. After a few minutes of winding through, I pointed at the compass on the Silverado's dashboard display. "We've turned this way and that, yet the compass has read northwest the whole time." Jack gave a tentative nod. "The road leads northwest into the Weeping Woods, no matter what." Tina said, "That doesn't make any sense." "I told you it'd be weird, didn't I?" Jack had an edge of irritability to him now in his voice, in the knit of his brow. "You good, bro," I gently said. "Sorry," he sighed. "My bad, guys. This road gives me the creeps, is all. I'll chill." It was just then that we rounded a dense thicket of trees and saw a massive fallen log blocking the road. "Perfect," Marcus groaned. Jack cursed under his breath, his eyes darting left and right, peering through the trees. I raised my hands. "Hey now, we've got the tools to deal with this. No biggie, I'll take care of it." Tina shuffled about before raising her DSLR camera. "Marcus and I will take a few pictures while you deal with it. And maybe a video or two." She rolled down her window. "Sounds good." I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened my door, and jumped out. The ground I fell onto would have been soft and inviting, if not for the thick tree root that jabbed into the sole of my foot. As Jack clicked the ignition and shut the Silverado's engine down, the first thing I noticed in the chilly autumn evening was the silence. A deep, encompassing quiet lay over the road, broken only by the hissing of the wind as it bothered the dark leaves that had yet to fall. "Damn," I whispered to myself, not entirely certain why I felt the need to keep my voice down. A dense fog had descended on the woodland. I suppose that was dampening the forest sounds. As I walked to the back of the truck, Jack stepped out and joined me. I told him, "I don't mind handling this on my own, you know." He shook his head. "Nah, I'll help you." "It's all good." I nodded, though with how shifty he was being, I almost wished he'd have just stayed in the damn truck. In any case, we grabbed a couple saws and walked over to the log. It was the corpse of a huge tree, and several of its thickest limbs were tangled with other still living trees at the edge of the road. I gestured toward those limbs, then looked at Jack. "What do you think?" "Yeah, we saw off the big arms, the jammed ones, then we tow the log once it's loose." Nodding, I got started. Both Jack and I went hard. The sky was dimming, though it wasn't even late into the afternoon. The grinding and zipping of our saws seemed to violate the serenity of the forest, its near-perfect silence spoiled by the sounds of men. It was awfully uncomfortable, both because of the disturbance, and because getting through those limbs was a ton of work. "We should have brought a friggin' chainsaw," I chuckled. "Eh?" Jack murmured in reply. "It's weird," I called over the scraping of our saws. The way it feels like it's almost evening. It's overcast today, but feels like it's too dim. Yeah, that happens. Nothing unusual. Motion at the periphery of my vision turned me around before Jack had finished his sentence. I saw a pale limb, a ropey leg vanish behind a tree. What? Jack asked. I looked at him. I saw something. Look, I turned around pointing, and saw that the pale leg I'd seen was just the twisted trunk of a stubby tree. It hadn't vanished behind the tree. It was still there, curling away and out of sight. Hell, it didn't even look all that much like a leg. I turned back to Jack. I'm an idiot, I said with a grin. It's nothing. It's hard to see through the fog. My mind is messing with me. Jack's eyes stayed fixed on the forest beyond me. You're sure? He asked. Yeah, bro, it's nothing. I got back to sawing. Another 15 minutes droned by before we felt the tree was dislodged enough to be towed. We hooked up the towing line and revved the engine, pulled the dead tree by one end until it was out of the way. One sec, Jack said as he hopped back out to reel in the towing cable. It's dark, Tina pointed out. Too dark. I craned my neck down to peer past the truck's ceiling and over the treetops. The grey sky looked like what I'd expect at 7 or 8 p.m., though a glance at the dash display revealed the time to be just 1 p.m. Yeah, I muttered. Jack wasn't kidding. This place is weird. It's not too late to turn back, Marcus begged. We can pick something else and start fresh. No, Tina snapped. We've already put way too much into this. Besides, the weirder the better, right? I recorded a bit while you guys were out, explaining the situation. She lowered her voice. I talked a little about Jack's behavior, too. I turned to glare at her. Really? Of course, she said. This little psychological quandary of his may well make for this project's best anecdotes. She wasn't wrong about that. Still, it felt wrong to turn our friend into a case study without him knowing. I don't like it, said Marcus. You don't like any of this, Tina drawled. It's fine. Jack climbed back into the truck, having coiled and stowed the towing cable. Finally, let's get going. He tossed the Silverado into gear and we set off. The dead and mauled log that had obstructed our path floated past my side of the truck as we went. Beyond, I thought I saw another pale limb retreat behind a tree. This time I knew better than to dwell on a figment of my imagination. The road seemed to narrow as we delved farther. To be more specific, it felt as though the twisting trees flanking it leaned in more. We saw less of the sky as branches from either side of the track mingled overhead. With each turn the fog thickened and the daylight faded. At least the road's staying clear, I said to the others as Jack flipped on the headlights. By then I couldn't even see past the closest line of tree trunks, and honestly I was glad. Keeping my eyes set steady on the road ahead was simpler, more calming. There's a little more to the legend, Jack said after some time. The rest of us looked to him. The victims of the walker, he explained. They're said to remain bound to the weeping woods. They're spirits. He glanced at the rear view, probably meeting Tina and Marcus's eyes. Some claim they've seen those spirits, trying to leave the woods but never able to get far. They're trapped, Tina remarked, unable to move on to an afterlife. Something like that, replied Jack. The four of us had little else to say the rest of the way. The constant rumble of the Silverado, coupled with the deepening dark, lulled us into a stupor. It was 2:45 p.m. when we reached the end of the road. As the truck pulled into the small clearing, I started. Holy shit, there's a car. Jack looked over to my side of the truck. I heard the other two shuffling as they straightened to look too. Oh God, Marcus whispered. How common is that? Asked Tina. Jack cleared his throat. Not very. Still though, there's a legend surrounding this place. We aren't the only intrepid folk to brave the weeping woods. I peered into the car. It seemed empty. Probably just someone exploring like we are. Yeah, Jack agreed. So, Tina said, this is it then? Yeah, answered Jack. Past that tree line. That's the weeping woods. Looks the same as the rest of these woods, I pointed out. It's not, Jack replied. Come on. The sooner we make camp, the sooner we can relax. He swung his door open and stepped out. Fuck me in the ass, Marcus groaned as he kicked his door open. Let's get it over with, he jumped out. Tina and I followed suit. As the others unloaded the truck, I walked over to the derelict car. It was an old Toyota, rusted all along its frame, with so much grime over its windows that it was tough to see through. There was no way that someone had been driving behind that dirty windshield. This thing had been here for a while. I placed the bottom of my palm on the window and rubbed away as much of the grime as I could. Then I lowered myself and peered inside. There wasn't anything unusual in there. Some junk on the passenger side floor, a travel mug in the cup holder, a tote bag in the back. The only thing that caught my attention was a slip of paper on the dash. I rounded the hood until I was standing over that bit of the windshield. I spat on the glass and wiped again. The slip of paper had bold handwriting in all caps that read, "Gonna look. I have to tell Lorena it was a crash." I backed away from the hood. The trees hissed as a gust of wind swept through the clearing. "Guys," I called. They walked over. "What is it?" Tina asked. "Read this." I waited for them each to take a look. "Oh God," Marcus whispered. Tina asked Jack, "Have people been known to come here to commit suicide? You know, like Aokigahara Forest in Japan." Jack shook his head. "No, not that I know of." "This person seriously did not come back," Marcus said. "He could have gotten lost," I offered. We all looked at Jack. He shrugged. Marcus threw up his hands. "At what point do we concede that this forest is actually dangerous?" "You're an academic, Mark," Tina said. "Do you really believe the Woodwick Walker is real?" "I'm not saying that," he spat back. "But legends arise for a reason, don't they? In this case, I'd argue that reason was to justify the dangers of this cursed place." Tina scowled to herself. Then she looked at me. "How are you feeling about all of this?" I looked from her to Marcus. "I'm more curious than scared at this point." "Sorry, Mark." Tina looked at Jack. "And you?" "I want to see this through." She looked back to Marcus. Well, Marcus groaned for what must have been the 50th time that day. "All right, whatever, let's go." As we swung on our backpacks and grabbed our other bags, the sky dimmed until it seemed only twilight remained. Jack sighed sharply, nodded at the three of us, then led the way into the weeping woods. I almost expected some supernatural shift in the air the moment we crossed that tree line, but it was as anticlimactic as you'd expect. If anything was off, it was the same stuff I'd already been bothered by. The extraordinary silence, the unusual darkness, and every so often a pale limb fading into the gloom. We hiked on, our shuffling footfalls mingling with the sounds of creaking wood. Jack marked the trees as we went so that we'd be able to navigate back to the truck. "How far?" Marcus asked after some 30 minutes. However far we want, I guess," Jack answered. "There's nowhere specific for us to go," Tina said. "Nah," replied Jack. "Once you're in, you're in. I just figured we'd go a good ways. We drove so far for this. Might as well make it count, right?" "No," Marcus rebuked. "Not right. We're stopping here." His bags thumped onto the forest floor. His backpack followed. I looked around. "Jack, is this spot okay?" "Good as any, I guess." "Then I'm cool with it. Let's make camp." The four of us got to work. It was dark enough then that we had to click on our flashlights. I raised the tents. Jack gathered firewood. Marcus got started on supper, and Tina set up some of the recording equipment. We didn't talk much for the next 20 minutes. I think we all felt the same yearning to be done with the work and settle in. It had been a long day, the type that strained the mind. We were ready to loosen up. Despite the autumn moisture over the wood, Jack managed to get a fire going at the center of camp. I pitched our 4 tents in a circle nearby, then unfolded our chairs right around the stone circle of the fire pit. Marcus placed the cooking pot by the flames, and the three of us sat down just as Tina finished with the tripods. The cameras and microphonists held an eerie sort of vigil around camp. I checked my phone as Tina took her seat across from me. It was 4:42 p.m. I looked up straight up and saw faint grey light peeking through the treetops. A breeze brushed fallen leaves past my feet. Marcus asked me, "Do you have any bars?" I glanced at my phone again, then shook my head. "Me neither," he went on. My reception dropped, 1 bar at a time, starting from the moment we turned onto that winding road. "I told you guys it was going to be weird," Jack mumbled. We spoke softly for a while longer as the stew broiled. Through that time, every one of us kept looking over our shoulders. The way the darkness seeped into those woods was abnormal. By the time we grabbed our bowls and started to eat, it was pitch black beyond the nearest circle of trees. As we ate, the winds that had been hissing through the woods slowed. They'd still come every 10 or 20 seconds, but it was like the trees weren't moving in reply anymore. Instead of rustling leaves and creaking wood, I'd just hear an eerie sighing as the air wafted through, and that darkness, the dark encroached, like it was alive. The shadows past the circle of trees pushed into our modest campsite, like they were trying to get to us. But each time that dark crawled forward, a crackling of our campfire would send it back. Of course, these were my imaginings, or I thought at the time. "That was delicious," she chirped. "Thank you, Mark. Don't mention it." "Well," she continued, "it's probably too dark to venture out or film much of anything, and yet it's too early to hit the hay. So I suggest we just lean into the whole camping in the woods cliché and exchange ghost stories." I laughed, so did Jack. Marcus didn't. "Hell yeah," I said as I clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Come on, Marcus, surely you've got a spooky tale or two." So we sat around our little reservoir of warmth and light and told our cheesy ghost stories. To all of our surprise, the scariest story by far came from Marcus. It was a tale about the haunting of little Landry. But that's a story for another day. Let's get back to the Weeping Woods. After a couple hours of hanging about, drinking tea, and discussing what we'd do come dawn, the 4 of us agreed to sleep early. We were exhausted after the long drive north and the trek through the woods, and the sooner we slept, the more energy we'd have to venture out at dawn. So we snuffed out our campfire, the embers hissing as cool water consumed them, and we crawled into our tents. There was one for each of us. Once I'd gotten my belongings in order and felt comfortable in my bedding, I clicked my flashlight off. A little light leaked in from the others' tents as they shuffled around. Then they turned their lights off too. What remained was perfect, absolute darkness. I held my hand out right in front of my face and moved it side to side and couldn't see a thing. And apart from the odd cough or shuffle from one of my companions, the only noise that remained was the ethereal sighing of the wind. As creepy as it was, there was a certain coziness to being bundled up in a sleeping bag while surrounded by nature. Plus, as I mentioned, I was exhausted, so I managed to drift to sleep. The coming hours were marked by a fitful slumber. I had nightmares. They're in that forest, but I couldn't tell you what they were about. It's like I know, but don't know. All I can say is that I was racked by dark dreams for the few hours that I was asleep, and then I woke to the sound of creaking wood. My breath caught in my throat when I heard it. Fear danced up my spine. I know. We were in the forest. Of course, there was creaking wood. But no, this creaking was different. This creaking was long, slow, with whispers hidden within. This creaking was alive. Slowly I sat up within my tent, head swiveling one way then the next in the dark, as I tried to ascertain which direction the noise came from. But I couldn't. It was as though the sound came from all directions. There was no longer any wind, only the creaking. I wondered whether my friends were awake, too. If I was alone in hearing the sound, would they believe me if I told them about it come the morning? I considered calling out to them, but the truth was I was so damn scared in that moment that no words would have come. Images flashed in my mind as my imagination conjured a visage to match that horrible creaking. And then I heard it. I nearly missed it over the din of the forest. But I heard it, Jack's quivering voice just barely louder than a whisper. "He's here. Stay in your tents, don't look at him." The way he uttered the words sent ice through my veins. My limbs grew as stiff as the tree trunks surrounding our camp as I held my breath and closed my eyes. The creaking came closer. I heard shuffling from one of the other tents. It made me angry. Who the hell was making so much noise? The whispering within the creaking grew louder. I could almost make out words within the hissing gibberish. And then a blinding light came on, so bright against the forest's dark that I noticed it through my eyelids. Instinctively, I opened my eyes and looked up. Through my tense mesh fabric, I saw a figure standing with a flashlight in hand. By the shape and height and trembling of the figure, I knew it was Jack. Concern for my friend turned out to be a stronger force than that of fear. "Jack," I gasped, "what are you doing?" He raised a hand in the direction of my tent. "Quiet, close your eyes and be quiet. I'm fine." The tone of his voice told me that I had to obey. I closed my eyes again and held my breath. The creaking drew even nearer. It sounded like it was just outside my tent. Wood straining and flexing under a sort of weight. Jack's breathing had grown ragged. There were hints of whimpering accompanying each panting breath. I wasn't religious, but at that moment I nearly started praying to whatever God might listen. I would have done so, in fact, if the creaking didn't stop. All at once, a sighing breeze washed over our campsite, and the oppressive creaking presence that had stood among us was gone. And as I opened my eyes and saw a flashlight laying on the forest floor, I realized that Jack was gone too. I crawled toward my tent flap and unzipped it. "Jack," I called. As I ambled out, I saw Tina doing the same, her eyes wide in the dark. "He's gone," she whispered. A second later, Marcus's flap opened, and he poked his head out. His expression told me that he too had been awake for all of it. "Jack," I cried far more loudly than I was comfortable with. There was no reply. I picked up his flashlight, swinging it around in every direction, squinting into the gloom beyond the trees. There was nothing, no one. I pointed the flashlight at the ground where it had laid. An impression in the mulch clearly marked the flashlight, as well as the spot where Jack had stood. But there were no obvious marks leading away from there. Tina startled me as she barked a laugh. "Oh, this is great, this is absolutely fantastic." Scowling at her, I said, "What are you talking about?" "This is a prank, of course it's a prank. And Jack got us good." She shook her head, chuckling. I tried to think clearly despite my racing heart. After a moment I nodded. "I suppose that's the most logical thing to assume." "Are you kidding me?" Marcus whisper shouted. "You both heard the wood, didn't you?" "Yeah, but we're in a forest, aren't we?" I replied. "In a creepy forest, no less," Tina agreed. "I reckon Jack just pulled the prank of the century on us." She pointed at some of the recording equipment. "And he's got the whole damn thing recorded. We'll never live this down." "Right," I said. I told Marcus, "We'll look at the footage. That'll settle your nerves." "What?" He nodded. "Let's." Tina gathered the one camera that was pointed at our camp. It was cold, so I struck up another fire in the pit as she looked through the footage. I glanced at my phone as I settled into my chair. It was 12:15 a.m., just past midnight. "Ha!" she burst out after another minute searching. "Told you so." She leapt from her seat, rounding the fire before crouching between Marcus and I. As she hit play on the camera, we saw a grainy image of our tents, lit only by Jack's flashlight as he stood amidst them, looking around. I briefly thought I could make out a couple pale figures in the dark background, but quickly dismissed the notion, given how unclear the image was. "Is there audio?" I asked. "Should be, yeah," answered Tina. "Then why is there no noise?" She shrugged. "We must have been imagining things." A few tense moments of the video passed before Jack froze. His flashlight pointed in the direction of nothing that we could see. Maybe it was something off camera? The 50mm lens captured the breadth of our camp, but not much beyond it. Or maybe he was just pranking us after all. In any case, he set the flashlight down, even as he craned his neck to keep his eyes fixed on whatever he was looking at. Then he walked in that same direction, the light shining brightly off his back as he went. He wasn't moving quickly or slowly, just steadily, and that confirmed that there was audio on the recording, because we heard the crunching of leaves as Jack departed. "You see," Tina said as she hit pause on the video. "Bastard pranked the hell out of us." She straightened, letting the camera rest on its strap, and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Jack, come out already. Prank's done. You win." If he was actually hiding somewhere in the dark, he didn't even make a peep. Tina called out a couple more times, and I even joined in on the last one, insisting that Jack come back. There was no answer. "You still think this is a prank?" Marcus asked. I looked at him uncertain. Tina sternly said yes. Marcus frowned. "Then where the hell is Jack?" Tina looked away. I stood up with a sigh. "Look, whatever this is, we've got to track him down one way or another, right? We're in the woods and far from any sort of help. Even if this is just a really overdone prank, we can't risk him getting lost or hurt out there." "Oh, fuck me," Marcus groaned as he pressed his face into his hands. "Yeah, that's fair," Tina agreed. "It's chilly, let's bundle up a little, grab as many lights as we can carry and head out. I'll also keep this camera running." "I'll grab a knife," Marcus said. Tina and I looked at him uncomfortably. "To mark the trees," he said as he rolled his eyes, "so we can actually find our way back." "Ah," I replied, "smart." A couple minutes later we set out into the forest, in the direction that the flashlight had been pointing when Jack left it. We called out his name, our voices losing some of their optimism with each repetition. Our lights were less effective than they should have been. The darkness seemed to devour them, making it hard to see farther than 20 or so feet ahead. Fear and frustration mingled in my chest as I looked left and right, peering through the trees, shouting as loudly as my courage let me. "Jack, Jack, Jack, Jack," Marcus cursed. "I've marked 15 trees, guys. We should really turn back." "Sure," I sighed, "we'll head back, then start out again in a different direction." As we turned around, a sharp crack sounded. Tina screamed. Gasping and looking over at her, I braced for what I might see. What, Tina, what is it?" She was looking down, with one hand placed over her chest. Oh God," she stepped back. "Come look." Marcus and I padded towards her. A broken old bone lay in Tina's boot print. "It's human," she whispered. "What?" I spat, genuinely startled. "How do you know?" "Because I studied this sort of thing in a recent course," she hissed. "That is, without a doubt, a human femur." Grimacing, I brushed the mulch aside with my boot, revealing more of the skeleton. Marcus gasped. "You don't think?" I frowned at him. "You mean?" I glanced back down at the skeleton. "Oh no, definitely not. These bones are old. There's no way. Maybe it's the guy who had parked his car at the edge of the woods," offered Tina. "Maybe," I murmured as I uncovered more of the corpse. By the time I'd finished, the three of us were looking down on a full human skeleton. The hands' arms were folded over the rib cage, with most of the hand bones resting on the sternum at the center of the chest. Mixed in with those hand bones was a bundle of sticks. "Jesus Christ," Tina muttered. She was still recording, making sure not to miss a thing. "Let's hurry back," I said. A sense of dread was settling in. Maybe I was being impractical, but I couldn't help it. Marcus led the way, as he could best recognize the tree markings. Our pace was hurried, frantic even. Even Tina was spooked. The few times I looked at her, I saw her mouth pursed to a thin line. In hindsight, it's silly to think that it was the dead one that spooked us so much. The one we didn't even know. Marcus stepped back into camp and immediately gathered wood for a new fire. Tina paced back and forth, keeping to herself. I was antsy, restless, terrified. I feared the worst. "We need to head out again. Jack is still out there." Marcus and Tina looked at me. Tina said, "Where would we even look?" "I don't know. Anywhere. Pick a direction." I aimed my flashlight opposite from the way Jack had left, shining its light through a row of trees, and gasped. I saw a pair of legs poking out from behind one of the trunks. By the style of pants, I knew. Geez, I'm sorry. As I mentioned at the start of this story, talking about this is difficult, particularly once I get to this part. I realize this is abrupt, but I need to take a bit of time to gather my thoughts, to regroup. Give me a day, and I promise I'll get back to you with the rest of this story. In the meantime, I encourage you to avoid the woods if you can. You certainly won't find me within 50 miles of any forests. See you soon.